Imagine waking up each morning, and before you even set foot on the floor, you're already overwhelmed. Your mind is flooded with obligations, anxieties, and distractions. You reach for your phone, scrolling through notifications, emails, or news that reminds you of the world's chaos. Before you've taken a deep breath, you've let the world set the tone for your day. You haven't even acknowledged the very fact that you are alive, that you have another opportunity to orient yourself properly in this world, to take responsibility for the day ahead, to engage in a manner that is meaningful and worthwhile. This is no trivial matter. The way you start your morning is a profound indicator of what you prioritize, what you value, and ultimately what kind of life you are constructing brick by brick through your habits. And one of the most disastrous mistakes people make is neglecting the sacred act of speaking to something beyond themselves, to something higher, to something that orders chaos into meaning. You might not think it's a big deal to wake up and immediately immerse yourself in the trivial, but let's consider what that truly means. If you refuse to start the day in reflection, in humility, in gratitude, you are, by default, deciding that your own limited, flawed perspective is enough. You are declaring, I can handle this alone, but can you? Have you really handled things alone? Look at the evidence of your own life. If you found yourself lost, overwhelmed, aimless, or resentful, perhaps it's because you have refused to engage in the dialogue that brings order into your life. The notion of prayer, or deep contemplation if you prefer, is not just some religious obligation. It is the fundamental act of aligning yourself with the highest possible good. It is an admission that you are not all-knowing, that your own wisdom is insufficient, that you require something beyond your immediate grasp to guide you properly. And that is not a weakness. It is the greatest strength a person can develop. The willingness to admit their own limitations. When people neglect this practice, they are engaging in a kind of arrogance, a belief that they can orient themselves in a world filled with suffering, complexity, and uncertainty without first humbling themselves before something greater. And let's not be naive. Everyone bows to something. If you are not structuring your mornings around seeking what is good, true, and meaningful, then you are structuring them around something else: distraction, anxiety, resentment, or the mundane trivialities of existence. There's a reason that people who have cultivated lives of immense meaning and responsibility consistently begin their days in reflection, in prayer, in a structured engagement with wisdom. It's because they understand that chaos is always knocking at the door, waiting to consume them. Without first centering oneself in something stable, how can you possibly expect to navigate the turbulence of the world? Neglecting this fundamental practice has consequences. If you refuse to start your day with a conscious act of humility and alignment, then what exactly are you relying on? Your emotion, the fleeting feelings of the morning, the unpredictable events that will inevitably arise. That is a dangerous and fragile foundation upon which to build your life. And it's not just about you. It's about the people around you. If you begin your day rooted in anxiety, self-obsession, or distraction, you carry that energy with you into every interaction. Your family feels it. Your colleagues feel it. The world in subtle ways is shaped by the attitude you bring. But if you begin with gratitude, with an honest recognition of your responsibilities and a plea for the strength to carry them out properly, then you have armed yourself against the bitterness and chaos that so easily creeps in. So, what's the alternative? It's quite simple. Begin with humility. Begin with gratitude. Begin with an acknowledgement that you are not the master of the universe, that you do not have all the answers, and that you require guidance. Speak, whether in formal prayer or in deep internal dialogue. Speak to what is highest. Orient yourself towards something meaningful. Ask for wisdom. Ask for clarity. And listen. If you think this is insignificant, test it. Try it for a month. Wake up, and before you check your phone, before you let the world dictate your thoughts, take a few minutes to center yourself. Be grateful for your existence. Ask how you might live today in a way that is noble and good. See what happens. You might find that life doesn't feel quite so overwhelming. You might find that your interactions improve, that your mind is clearer, that your sense of direction strengthens. And if that's the case, then it would be foolish to ignore it, because the alternative, the path of neglect, of self-sufficiency rooted in pride, of ignoring the fundamental need to orient yourself properly, is a road that leads to bitterness, regret, and unnecessary suffering. Don't let another morning pass without setting the right foundation. Do this not because you are weak, but because you are strong enough to recognize the limits of your own strength. And when you do, you may find that the day ahead is not just another collection of hours to be endured, but an opportunity to engage with life in a way that is truly meaningful. Waking up in the morning is a reset, a new beginning. The previous day, with all of its triumph and failures, is behind you. You have been granted another opportunity to act, to move forward, to build something meaningful. But what happens when, instead of embracing that opportunity, you allow the first moments of your day to be consumed by bitterness, resentment, and complaint? People underestimate the power of their words, especially in the first few moments of the day. They wake up and immediately begin to articulate their dissatisfaction about their jobs, their responsibilities, their circumstances. It's too early. They're too tired. Life is unfair. They mutter these complaints without even considering the impact that this pattern of speech is having on their perception of reality. Because here's the truth. Your words shape the world around you. They define the boundaries of your experience. If the first thing you do in the morning is complain, you are setting a precedent for the rest of the day. You are establishing a framework in which your reality is one of suffering, inconvenience, and frustration. And the more you reinforce this framework, the more difficult it becomes to see anything outside of it. You don't just complain about your morning, you start complaining about your commute, about your work, about your relationship. Before long, your entire worldview is structured around a fundamental belief that life is primarily an exercise in misery. And that's a dangerous belief. Because if you believe that life is nothing but suffering, then you begin to act in ways that reinforce that suffering. You start treating people with more hostility. You become more cynical. You find yourself drawn into resentment. And from resentment, it's only a short walk to despair. And once you reach despair, what do you have left? Nothing but a gnawing sense of emptiness. A void that you attempt to fill with distraction or numbness or vice. It's important to understand that complaining is not merely a reaction to external circumstances. It is a chosen behavior. And it's an insidious one because it masquerades as something harmless. Just a passing comment, just an expression of how things are, but that's the problem. It's an expression of how things are to you. And the more you allow it, the more it shapes what you see. It determines the lens through which you filter your experiences. This isn't to say that life is free of suffering, far from it. There are things worth mourning. There are real injustices in the world, real struggles that demand attention. But waking up and choosing to complain about the mundane, about the weather, about trivial inconveniences, about the responsibilities that you, in many cases, chose for yourself, is not an act of confronting suffering with strength. It's an act of weakness, and weakness invites more weakness. The more you give yourself permission to grumble, the more it becomes your default state. You meet others who share the same mindset, and suddenly your conversations become competitions over who has it worse. You reinforce each other's negativity, sinking deeper and deeper into the belief that everything is terrible, that you are a victim, that life is unfair. And once that belief takes hold, it's incredibly difficult to dislodge. But there is another way, and it starts with a single decision: to take responsibility for your words and, by extension, your perception of reality. The moment you wake up, you have a choice. You can look around and find something to be grateful for, or you can look around and find something to complain about. Both are always available. The world is complex, It contains beauty and horror in equal measure. What you see depends on what you train yourself to look for. Gratitude is not naivety. It's not pretending that life is perfect. It's an active decision to focus on what is good, what is worth preserving. It's acknowledging that despite the suffering, despite the challenges, there is still meaning to be found. There is still something worth striving toward. And this isn't just abstract philosophy. The science supports it. People who practice gratitude experience lower levels of stress, improved relationships, and greater psychological resilience. Why? Because gratitude reorients your focus. It shifts your attention from what is lacking to what is present. It doesn't eliminate suffering, but it gives you the strength to bear it. This doesn't mean that you never acknowledge difficulty. It doesn't mean that you ignore real problems, but it does mean that you don't let those problems define your entire existence. It means that you don't allow yourself to be consumed by petty grievances, by habitual negativity, by the kind of complaining that serves no purpose other than to reinforce your own dissatisfaction. And perhaps most importantly, it means that you set a different tone, not just for yourself, but for those around you. When you begin your day with complaint, you don't suffer alone. You bring that negativity into every interaction. You poison the atmosphere of your home, your workplace, your community. But when you choose gratitude, when you decide to focus on what is good and meaningful, you uplift not just yourself, but those you encounter. So tomorrow morning, when you wake up, pay attention to the first words that come out of your mouth. Pay attention to the thoughts that take shape before you even step out of bed. Are they words of gratitude, of responsibility, of strength, or are they words of resentment, of frustration, of complaint? Because one path leads to bitterness and the other leads to meaning. And the choice, whether you realize it or not, is entirely yours. You wake up in the morning and before your feet even hit the floor, you're making a choice. Whether you recognize it or not, that choice determines the trajectory of your entire day. The problem is most people don't realize they're making a choice at all. They assume they're simply reacting to the alarm clock, reacting to the obligations waiting for them, reacting to the world as it presents itself. But that's not true. What you focus on in those first waking moments dictates how you engage with everything that follows. And for far too many people, the first thing they do is turn to the world, not with intention, not with purpose, but with passive, almost mechanical submission. It's subtle at first. The alarm goes off, and before even getting out of bed, they reach for their phone. They check their messages, they open the news, they scroll through social media. Without realizing it, they have relinquished control over the first moments of their day to forces that have no vested interest in their well-being. They allow external voices, voices of anxiety, outrage, distraction, to dictate the psychological tone with which they will approach the world. And once that tone is set, it is incredibly difficult to reverse. People underestimate just how dangerous this habit is. The mind is malleable, particularly in the morning when it is transitioning from rest to engagement. What you introduce into that space matters. If the first thing you do is expose yourself to the chaos of the world, bad news, political outrage, social comparison, you are voluntarily beginning your day in a state of disorder. You are allowing external stimuli to hijack your attention before you've even had a chance to orient yourself. And what does that do to you? It puts you on the defensive. It fragments your focus. It breeds anxiety before you've even stepped out of bed. Instead of setting the terms for how you will meet the day, you allow the day to impose itself upon you. And once you've given up that ground, it's hard to get it back. This isn't just an abstract psychological observation. There's real science behind it. When you wake up and immediately dive into digital stimulation, you flood your brain with information before it has had a chance to fully transition from sleep. The dopamine-driven cycle of checking notifications, scanning headlines, and consuming quick bursts of content conditions you to seek out immediate stimulation rather than deep, meaningful engagement. And if you begin your day this way, it becomes exponentially more difficult to shift into a state of true focus later on. But there's something even more troubling about this habit. It reveals a fundamental failure to take responsibility for your own mind. It suggests that rather than actively structuring your thoughts, rather than deliberately orienting yourself towards something meaningful, you are allowing the external world to dictate your psychological state. You are surrendering control over one of the few things that is truly yours: your attention, your focus, your ability to engage with life on your own terms. And what are you trading it for? The latest outrage? A meaningless headline? The carefully curated highlight reel of someone else's life? This is not trivial. It's not just about wasting time. It's about training yourself to be reactive rather than proactive. It's about conditioning yourself to be at the mercy of whatever information happens to find you rather than actively seeking out what is useful, true, and good. So what's the alternative? The alternative is to begin your day with intention, to take control of your own mind before letting the world intrude upon it, to carve out a space in which you decide deliberately how you will approach the day ahead. That might mean starting with silence. It might mean prayer or meditation. It might mean reading something meaningful, something that grounds you in wisdom rather than reactionary noise. It might mean writing down your thoughts before the outside world has a chance to influence them. The point is not that you should ignore the world entirely. The point is that you should engage with it on your own terms, from a place of strength rather than passivity. If you begin your day by first establishing clarity, by deciding what actually matters, then you will be far better equipped to handle the inevitable challenges that come your way. And here's something else to consider. The way you start your morning doesn't just affect you, it affects everyone you interact with. If you begin your day in a state of chaos, rushed, anxious, reactive, then you bring that energy with you into your work, your relationships, your conversation. But if you begin your day with focus, with gratitude, with discipline, then you bring that presence, that steadiness into everything you do. This isn't easy. It requires discipline. It requires pushing back against deeply ingrained habits. But the consequences of failing to do so are far worse. If you don't take control of your morning, something else will. And if you consistently allow external forces to dictate your state of mind, then you are, in a very real sense, surrendering your freedom. Tomorrow morning, before you reach for your phone, before you let the world pull you in 100 different directions, stop, take a breath, decide deliberately what kind of person you want to be today. Because the world is chaotic enough as it is, the least you can do is meet it with a mind that is your own. You wake up and before the day has even begun, you are at war with yourself, with time, with the responsibilities that await you. The alarm goes off, and instead of rising, you hesitate. You negotiate with yourself. Maybe 5 more minutes, maybe 10. You hit the snooze button, and in that seemingly harmless act, you have already compromised. You have already told yourself without words, but through action, that your word is not binding, that the commitment you made to wake up and face the day is optional, that comfort is more valuable than discipline, and that is a dangerous way to start the day. People don't realize how much they undermine themselves in these small moments. They assume it's trivial, just a little more sleep, just a delay. But that delay is symbolic. It establishes a pattern, a precedent. The first decision you make in the morning is an act of either discipline or avoidance, and that sets the tone for everything that follows. If the first thing you do is break a commitment to yourself, what does that say about how you will handle the rest of the day? How will you meet the challenges ahead if you can't even meet the challenge of getting out of bed when you said you would? It's not just about waking up early. It's about the fundamental structure of your character. You have a responsibility to yourself, to your future, to those who depend on you, to meet the day with purpose. But instead you choose delay, and what is delay if not avoidance? You put off the moment when you have to take responsibility. You grant yourself permission to remain in a passive, half-conscious state for just a little longer, but that little longer accumulates. It reinforces the idea that commitments can be postponed, that effort can be deferred, that you don't really have to do what you said you would do. And then what happens? You start the day in a rush. You scramble to make up for lost time. You tell yourself you'll be more disciplined tomorrow, but tomorrow comes and you do the same thing again. Because habits once established are not easily broken. The longer you allow yourself to start the day with avoidance, the harder it becomes to start the day with action. This is why discipline matters. Not because waking up at a certain time is some magical solution to all of life's problems, but because the act of keeping your word to yourself is foundational. If you say you'll wake up at 6, then wake up at 6. Not because it's easy, but because doing what is difficult in small ways prepares you for what is difficult in large ways. People assume that motivation comes before action, but that's not how it works. If you wait until you feel like getting up, you'll stay in bed indefinitely. Action produces motivation, not the other way around. When you discipline yourself to get up despite your reluctance, you train yourself to override your weaker impulses. You become someone who acts in accordance with their values rather than their fleeting desires. And that has ripple effects. If you start the day with discipline, you're far more likely to carry that discipline into the rest of your tasks. You won't procrastinate as much. You won't let distractions dictate your behavior. You will begin to see yourself as someone who follows through, and that identity shift is crucial. The way you perceive yourself determines how you behave. If you see yourself as someone who avoids difficulty, but if you see yourself as someone who meets challenges head on, you will begin to meet them with greater resolve. And this isn't just about you. The way you start your day influences the way you interact with others. If you begin in a state of disorder, rushed, anxious, frustrated, then that energy seeps into your relationships. You become more irritable, more impatient. But if you start with discipline, if you establish order within yourself first, then you carry that stability with you. You become someone who others can rely on, someone who operates from a place of control rather than chaos. So what's the alternative? The alternative is to stop negotiating with yourself, to recognize that the moment you allow excuses to creep in, you are undermining your own integrity. Get up when you say you will, not because it's comfortable, but because it's necessary. Treat that first act of the day as a small but significant test of your ability to act in alignment with your highest values. This is not about punishing yourself. It's about constructing a foundation of reliability. If you can trust yourself to get out of bed when you said you would, then you can trust yourself in more difficult situations. If you can master the small battles, you will be more prepared for the larger ones. Tomorrow morning when the alarm goes off, pay attention to the voice in your head, the one that tries to negotiate, that tries to convince you that delay is harmless. Recognize that voice for what it is, an invitation to weakness, and reject it. Rise with purpose, begin with discipline, because the way you start the day is the way you shape your life. The way you treat your body in the morning is a direct reflection of how you approach your responsibilities, your future, and your own potential. You wake up and you have a choice, whether you recognize it or not. You can nourish yourself, prepare yourself, and strengthen yourself, or you can neglect your body, mistreat it, and expect it to function properly despite your disregard. And that is a very bad strategy. Many people start their day in a state of neglect. They wake up sluggish, dehydrated, and malnourished. Instead of drinking water, they reach for coffee or energy drinks, artificially forcing their bodies into wakefulness without addressing the root cause of their exhaustion. They skip breakfast, or worse, they consume something filled with sugar, something easy and convenient, but completely lacking in sustenance. They tell themselves they don't have time to eat properly, that they're too busy, that it doesn't really matter. But it does matter, because when you start your day by mistreating your body, you compromise your ability to think clearly, to act decisively, to engage with the world in a meaningful way. You are not separate from your body. People like to think they exist purely in their minds, that their thoughts, their willpower, and their ambitions are enough. But your ability to function in the world is directly tied to how you treat your physical form. If you neglect your health, your energy levels will drop. Your focus will become scattered. Your emotions will become unstable. And that instability will affect every single thing you do. Your work, your relationships, your ability to withstand stress and pursue goals. Consider what happens when you skip breakfast, for example. You deprive your body of the fuel it needs to operate efficiently. Your blood sugar levels crash. Your brain, which relies on a steady supply of nutrients, begins to function at a lower capacity. You become irritable, impatient, and distracted. And what does that do to your day? You find yourself struggling to concentrate, overreacting to minor inconveniences, lacking the mental clarity required to make good decisions. One bad morning choice ripples outward, affecting everything that follows. But it's not just about food. It's about how you treat your body in general. Do you move in the morning, or do you remain stagnant? Do you stretch? Do you walk? Do you engage in some form of physical activity to signal to your body that it's time to wake up, time to engage with the world? Or do you roll out of bed stiff and groggy, expecting yourself to perform at a high level despite giving your body no reason to do so? Movement is essential. Your body was not designed to be motionless. It thrives on activity. When you move, you increase circulation. You send oxygen to your brain. You release endorphins, which improve mood and increase motivation. You establish momentum, physical, mental, and emotional, and that momentum carries into everything else. You are far more likely to be productive, focused, and engaged if you begin your day with movement rather than idleness. Neglecting your physical health in the morning is not just an act of self-sabotage. It's an act of ingratitude. You have been given a body capable of extraordinary things, capable of strength, endurance, resilience, and yet so many people treat their bodies with utter disregard. They abuse them with poor nutrition, excessive caffeine, lack of hydration, and total inactivity, and then they wonder why they feel exhausted, anxious, and unmotivated. The answer is obvious. They are not taking care of the very thing that allows them to function in the world. And here's the deeper issue. Neglecting your body is a sign that you do not truly value yourself. If you don't care for something, it's because you don't see it as worth caring for. And if you don't see yourself as worth caring for, then you have a much bigger problem. Because if you don't believe you deserve to be healthy, to be strong, to be at your best, then how will you ever believe that you deserve anything else? Success, fulfillment, purpose. Taking care of your body in the morning is an act of self-respect. It is a way of saying, I matter. My health matters. My ability to engage with the world matters. And when you make that choice, when you eat something nourishing, when you hydrate, when you move your body, you are reinforcing that belief, not just in your mind, but in your actions. And actions are what shape reality. So tomorrow morning, before you reach for that energy drink, before you convince yourself that skipping breakfast won't make a difference, before you decide that sitting motionless for hours is acceptable, think about the long-term consequences of these choices. Think about how different your life could be if you simply started your day with care rather than neglect. And then act. Take responsibility for your health, for your energy, for your physical well-being. Because if you don't, no one else will.